I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Wonnarua people and the Gringai clan. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
That journey, I don't think it will ever end, especially with Ollie is so determined that is the future of Margan Wine. And if a block isn't capable of making it our new single block range, we need to either pull it out or graft it over or change it into something that is, because if it's not aspirational, it's not worth having.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. You can't talk about the Hunter Valley without acknowledging the remarkable work and dedication of the Margan family. Andrew Margan and his wife Lisa are true stalwarts of the wine industry. Together now with their talented children, they have played a leading role in shaping the region's wine scene through their expertise, innovation and professionalism. Located in Broke, Margan is more than just a cellar door. It is an institution of holistic well-being and honest hospitality. Hi Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Hi, that's quite an introduction. Thanks a lot.
Well, you definitely deserve it. I have been dying to talk to you for a long time. You and your family have played an integral role in my career, from the very young days where I really had no idea what I was doing to today, which I still don't really have a clue. But you've been along for the ride the entire time, so it's just an honour to have you on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Andrew, we have to kind of give some context about where everything began. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and introduce the beautiful Frank Margan, and tell us a little bit about young Andrew as a young boy.
Yeah, well, I mean, my father was actually a journalist by trade, and he ended up being involved in writing about food and wine, and in the days of the early 60s when that wasn't a thing in popular media. In fact, I'm pretty sure he had the very first daily column in the inner city newspaper about wine and food as such, called the Ray Castle column at the time. So yeah, my father Frank got involved in wine, got fascinated by it through writing about it. He was employed by the Australian Wine Board with Len Evans to do marketing promotions around Australian wine. And at that time, of course, people weren't drinking a lot of table wine. Australian wine was being made into fortifieds and being drunk as fortifieds. And their role was to, number one, convince the Australian public that they should be drinking dry table wine, not fortified wine. And they were also to go around all the wineries in Australia and convince them to stop making fortifieds and start making dry table wine. So he got involved in the industry, decided that he wanted to do more than that and grow some grapes. So him and some partners bought a 100-acre block joining Tyrrells in Becolvin there, and then we planted a vineyards from with the help of old Murray Tyrrell and the Tyrrell family. I was probably about 6 years of age at the time, and from there I just was always loved, number one, being in the Hunter Valley, being on a vineyard and jumping the fence and going next door to Tyrrell's and hanging out in the winery and being a nuisance as a little kid, I'm sure. But I guess from there, the Tyrrell family, Murray and Ruth in particular, as our neighbours, took me under their wing a bit. Bruce and Anne, their children had both grown up and left home, and they took me under their wing. And the Tyrrell family basically mentored me all the way through to, I worked there for about nearly 20 vintages, and I think I just about did everything except work in the accounting department. They gave me so many opportunities to do so many things within the Tyrrell business, and it basically helped me understand, winemaking, grape growing, how to market wine, how to sell wine, all of that, which you need if you want to run your own wine business.
Well, that's for sure. I think we keep coming back to that, is that it's great to be specialised, but a holistic business, you do need to branch out and learn a thing or two about all the facets. Tell me a little bit about, back in those days, what were your parents, had their own vineyard. What were they doing at that time? Were they growing grapes and on selling them? What happened with their site?
Yeah, well, it is still there today. It is my father called it the buyers after the original owners of the land, and was originally a winery on the site, which is all just a couple of concrete vats. But they planted to Semillon and Shiraz using Tyrrell's cuttings that came off the Tyrrell's vineyard, and Murray helping them with advice. The grapes that came from there, a portion of it went to our own label that was called the Buyer's Vineyard, which I've still got a few bottles of. And the balance was sold to Tyrrell's, and it still is. Tyrrell's basically look after that vineyard these days. It's owned by John Colvin. And that wine, I actually went there this year when they were picking it and tasted grapes, saw it go through the press, tasted the finished wine, often goes into vat one because the Semillon is on that very typical, very old alluvial flats from the same clone. And that same flat that the buyer's Semillon was planted on basically states through Tyrrell's. It's called John O's Vineyard. It was originally called the Long Flat Vineyard. Then around the corner into the Short Flat, which has got where all the Short Flat old lines Semillon for that one comes from. So it's there's that same bit of country with the same clone planted.
Pretty amazing, and what a beautiful piece of history. So tell me a little bit about when you decided to study ag science and your career from there.
Well, I was quoted as saying from the age of 9, when people, adults ask you what you should be when you're going to grow up, it was never wanted to be an astronaut or a fireman. I always said I wanted to be a winemaker in the Hunter Valley, which back in the late 60s, early 70s was a pretty interesting answer. The wine industry was virtually non-existent, really. It was a tiny industry in this country back then, really. People weren't drinking wine. We weren't really into export. So, it was a small industry for sure. So me wanting to be a winemaker was like the most people didn't understand what that even meant. And when I finished, but I was from the age of being able to do any work at all, I worked at Tyrrell's. I couldn't wait for vintage when the grapes had been harvested and the winery came to life, and ramming vats and helping process fruit was something I looked forward to very much in my school holidays, and also gave me a nice bit of pocket money. So when I left school, Murray basically had me enrolled in Roseworthy to study winemaking, and which back in those days you needed to be you needed a industry person to actually sign you up into that course. You had to have industry relevance, otherwise you wouldn't get the course when Dr. Bryce Rankin was in charge of the course. So he put me in there, but somehow my mother actually ended up talking him out of it because she didn't want to lose me from the state to South Australia. So the compromise they came up with was that I go to Hawkesbury Ag College and study agriculture. And he figured that, I could do winemaking as a trade at Tyrrell's anyway, which is pretty well how it worked out in the end of the day. And getting the ag science, was a good science background. And, I was Hawkesbury was an amazing part of my life and something I'd never regret, that's for sure. So, and I did major in the area of soil conservation and engineering side of agriculture, which is, a lot of irrigation, refrigeration, stuff like that, fluid mechanics and all sorts of things that was all pretty handy in terms of working in a winery as well. So, coupled with that, but when I finished that course, I went straight to Tyrrell's and started work as assistant winemaker in the winery there, and basically running the cellar under the chief winemaker. I was on $18,000 a year as a salary, and that was how much winemaking was being paid back then. And it was at the same time that the Australian government were paying people to pull grapes out, $10,000 an acre to remove grapevines. So that's where the industry was at. It was probably at one of its lowest points. And I wondered if there was a future in it for me. People still weren't drinking wine in 1981 too much. So after I'd done that for nearly a year at Tyrrell's, I decided that I'd put all my eggs in one basket and that perhaps I needed to study something else as well in case the wine industry wasn't going to be a thing. So I went back and I enrolled in environmental sciences, environmental health degree at Hawkesbury again, and which is a course that a number of my mates had done, which I was slightly very interested in. And so went back and studied again, which is, again, something I certainly don't regret because I met my wife during that period and, again, had a great time going to Hawkesbury College, which is a fun place to be.
What a fork in the road, that where your mum stepped in and that decision, because it could have been, slightly different if you went to Roseworthy and philosophies could be quite different if you hadn't have had that intervention then. Oh,
look, sliding doors, I could still just be not just, working at Tyrrell's is a wonderful thing to do. And everyone who works there would tell you that. But really, it was Lisa, marrying Lisa, and Lisa's fueling my ambition, I guess, or stoking the fires of my ambition to leave Tyrrell's and start my own brand. I probably could have easily just stayed at Tyrrell's making wine. You're working with some of the greatest fruit in the world, and it was they were like family to me. And my mother could not believe the day that I left to start my own business. She couldn't understand why I would want to do that, but I certainly don't regret doing that. That's for sure. And so there's the sliding doors. Many Lisa certainly was part of that.
And you're not going to be able to get away from telling me about when you first saw Lisa and what were you thinking?
It was for me anyway. She's never said it, but it certainly was love at first sight for me. And from that moment, I pursued her on that basis that she was going to be the girl I was going to marry. So, it was one of those things. Smoky bar at college. Post holidays, first night back, sort of, and it all went from there. Yeah, so that's 40 years. That's 40 years ago, pretty well.
Holy moly. Well, she is such a gorgeous woman and so sassy and so much charisma and just stunning. So I can only imagine back in the day how you would have kind of stopped in your tracks and 40 years on still feel that way, which is so lovely to hear. Now, she was studying a master's degree in science in nutrition at the time. Is that right?
Well, she was actually doing she was actually doing a Bachelor of Education in Home Sciences. She then went on and did a Master's in Nutrition after that, yeah.
That's right, because she was training to be a chef, is that right?
Well, actually, say training to be a teacher and to teach home sciences in high school was what she was actually doing there. Once we got married, she moved to the Hunter Valley. With my father having a restaurant and being introduced to that sort of things and looking at that as a potential occupation rather than teaching, she decided to take a new path and did her apprenticeship under Robbie Molyneux at the time, and went on to become a chef.
Now, your father, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to look at the things that I looked up. Did he had a restaurant, The Cottage, is that right?
He did, yes. He bought an old milk bar in West Essnock on the Wallenby Road and turned it into the first delicatessen Essnock ever had, and then turned it into a restaurant called The Cottage, which really, there was Robert's restaurant and then there was The Cottage. There was really only two restaurants as such in the area back then. This is 1970, 75, around there. Yeah.
And did he do the cooking or did he hire someone else to do that?
He started off with a partner who was a cook, but that didn't last very long, and he just took over the cooking. I mean, he was a very good cook, very good chef. Really, at the end of the day, he went to France and worked in kitchens and figured he could just have a go, and he did. And Yeah, I mean, my father's a particularly interesting person, and he was a very creative person. You know, his ability to write and cook and you know, be involved in wine were all you know, channeled through from his creativity, and he didn't let anything get in the road of that. So yeah, interesting guy.
Sounds like a man after my own heart. I think I mean, you're a very clever person yourself, and I see what you've done here. You've replaced, or not replaced, that's a terrible word to use, but you have got used to good cooking and then decided you needed that in your life and then happily found Lisa. And I can see that you have been, ever since then, you know, well-rounded with lots of good food.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to cook myself. I do a lot of cooking around the place, but I think it's probably more along the lines of, you know, you meet someone, and you discover, you know, you've got very similar values, and one of the things we value highly, and the thing that we've impressed in our kids as well is, you know, good food and good wine and good, you know, having a good table. Is something that should be it should be very much part of your life, and something that needs, you know, to be respected as such. So yeah, we value that. We always have valued that, and I guess that's, you know, that's part of it.
That's for sure. And thank God you have, because of what you've created today. But let's talk a little bit about your time in Bordeaux. What were your first impressions when it went over there, and what were the lessons that you came away with?
Well, interestingly, you know, I mean, even whilst I was doing environmental science, I was going back to Tyrrell's to do the harvest. You know, by then I'd had a fair bit of experience in running their vintage cellar, it was quite a beast by then, because it's a combination of traditional machinery and lots of grapes and getting them all through processed and the juice into the tanks in the right conditions. So, you know, I was good at doing that. I've always been good at the logistical side of running a winery, and so it was great for Tyrrell's. You know, I could come back to every vintage and fill that role, so their winemakers can concentrate on the winemaking side of it down in the cellar. But by the time I got to 1987 and I graduated from a second course, I was actually thinking I wanted to have a year overseas travelling, and old Murray came to me at the end of it. He said, "I got a job for you in France, in Bordeaux, with a friend, and you can kill two birds with one stone, travel and you know, get some money while you're at it." So I took that job up at Shanteh Wale in the Grass, and again, you know, sliding doors that really got me back into the wine industry. So I had basically a year there, and you know, learned so much about myself. I mean, Lisa was still finishing her course. She came at the very end, and we did a bit of travelling, and she stayed with me right towards the end. But you know, we were making Semillon, being in the Grave, and making, of course, Cabernet Merlot. I learned an enormous amount. I didn't speak a word of French before I went there, and I walk into a French winery and all the French people surrounded me, and it was great. I mean, it was so good for me, and then I made some contacts also while I was there that I ended up, you know, working for a negotiating company that were based in Bordeaux and made wine all over the south of France for 3 years, and then ended up in Moldova for 6 months, and made a bit of wine in Hungary, and did all sorts of things off the back of that first visit to France, and yeah, loved every minute of it.
Well, making wine in Hungary must have been pretty cool. They've got some, you know, fascinating varieties and techniques. Did you find some people say that, you know, the Australian winemaking techniques are vastly different. Some people say it's all the kind of same thing in a different location. Did you find that you were learning vastly different techniques to what you'd seen in the Hunter Valley, or was it kind of same?
Well, I mean, the reason we were employed, and I spent much more time in Moldova, and it was much more influential what was happening in that country than Hungary. But the plan was that we were employed to take Australian winemaking, particularly white winemaking techniques, into Europe to you know, start making fruit forward wines rather than the complex styles that the Europeans had been making forever. So it was more about us using our techniques rather than learning their techniques. You know, the amazing thing in Moldova is that we made wine. And when I say we, it was I was in charge, and my offside, it was actually Con's Fimos, and Con has been since in charge of AWRI and all sorts of things. He's now Peter Lehman's as a winemaker. But between us, we had nothing. We had we had virtually no lab backup. We had people who were reluctant to use anything that we thought was usual, like sulfur. Or we had no water. We had to make our own water. We had to come up with ways to make wine with nothing. And it was, I know I learnt more about winemaking in that vintage than I've ever learned anywhere else, because I learned how to make wine with nothing. And I figured if I can make it with nothing, imagine what I can do if I had things. And that's what that taught me. And then, wherever we went in France, is what we were doing is making wines in Australian style. But it's interesting because I go to Germany now and make wine every year with this collaboration where I make this Mosel Riesling and bring it home. I'm learning so much about white wine making from traditional techniques that it is so different. The way the Germans make their Riesling compared to the way I make my Riesling in Germany is just such different techniques. And yet we still get we both get our results, and they both look at those wines and they do taste different off the same vineyard. But very different wines.
It's nice to hear, isn't it? I mean, you do want to see different techniques and take and keep learning, or utilize them or not utilize them. And as we know with wine, it's always about being open to still learning, because it is not a closed loop. It goes on and on and on into the nether regions. Tell me a little bit about this crazy decision you had to go out on your own against, I'm sure, the advice of many people. Tell me a little bit about the creation of Margan and your little Sayers Hill property.
Well, we bought the property. Lisa and I planted grapes back in, it was 89. So I was still at Tyrrell's, and again, Murray helped me. Murray Tyrrell helped me plant this first bunch of grapes that we had. So I had a full-time job at Tyrrell's, and I was actually, at that stage, I'd become marketing manager, which I'd only ever done the production side of things, really. All of a sudden, I'd been offered another contract to go back overseas, and he called me over one day and said, "I've got a job for you, a good opportunity for you here, and it's to be marketing manager of a 780,000 case company." And I said, "Well, I've never done any marketing in my life. I've only been a winemaker and growing grapes." And he said, "Well, that's why I want you to do the marketing, because you're going to be doing it from a solid product background instead of all this fluff of marketing people we've got who's been doing all the fluffy stuff. I'm sick of it." And I thought, what a great opportunity. So I took that on. But after I'd done that for 4 years at Tyrrell's, and by the fourth year, it's like I went back into the winery to make the Semillons for the first 3 years as marketing manager, because that's what I was doing. I was making that one, and all the unwooded whites in a certain area of the winery was my role as one of the winemakers. Though it was too much to do in marketing, and the Tyrrell said to me, "You can't go back to the winery this year. You got too much going on." So I missed a year of winemaking, and I'd done 4 years of marketing. I just didn't think I had any more ideas. Number one in marketing, but I still wanted to be a winemaker, and I sat down with Bruce at the time, and he said, "Well, it's pretty hard to go back. You need to, you're either going forward and I said, "Well, I just want to be a winemaker." So I have an opportunity, and Broke Fortage at that time was starting to boom in terms of people having planted vineyards in that period of the early 90s. And we're talking about 1996 now, and the wine industry was really taking off, and there wasn't a winery here in Broke. I was the president of the Broke Fortage Wine Growers, which I basically helped form, and I did the GI for the area, and there was a lot of pressure on me to build a winery and make everyone's wine out is. As a business plan, it seemed like a good one to set up a company that did contract winemaking, which is really the first in the Hunter as such, and make other people's wine and do mine on the side. And I did that with a partner at the time, David Hook. Hookie is still one of our best mates. So I left Tools October the 19th, 1996 was my last day, and started that business, which, as I say, was the first vintage between us. We ended up doing about 1,200 tonnes. It was way much bigger than we ever wanted to be, and it was actually out of control. And Margan, which was a brand that I basically started back then in '96 with Lisa, was 30 tonnes of that 1,200 tonnes. And I think both Hookie and I got to the end of that vintage, and because he had his own brand, and recognised that we'd worked incredibly hard to make 1,200 tonnes of wine, and the thing that didn't get looked after was my 30 tonnes and his 30 tonnes, and we thought that's not the answer for us, So we actually disbanded that and changed our model, and I reduced dramatically what I was doing, and he went back to his winery and took some of our clients, and I took some of them, but I use that existing customer base to build a winery and the cash flow to help pay for leasing of all the equipment. And then over the years, contract winemaking fell off, and Margan grew, and these days, we're 100% Margan and 0% contract winemaking.
Mm. Well, I'm sure it hasn't happened overnight. You now have over 100 hectares, a beautifully hatted restaurant, and you employ over 30 people. But I can imagine that those early days still seem incredibly memorable, and it has been a slog day in, day out. Tell me a little bit about the Broke-Fordwich sub-region, a little bit about its climate, a little bit about the soils, and what makes it unique.
Well, it's having done the GI submission, and at the same time at an industry level, representation level, being involved in the Colburn GI, doing Broke was very simple. It's such a geographically easily defined area, and that's one of the things you really need to have a simple GI. Was Colburn, with so much fighting amongst the traditional owners and the new people who are on the edges, and Lovedale and Mount View and Central Colburn and Belford, and trying to get all those people in the one room to agree on something. Actually, it never ended up happening. It was actually the GI was handed down by Wine Australia in the end, because they couldn't get an agreement. So, whereas Broke was something that I put together and everyone here agreed. Fordwich is a separate area without a village. Broke has got a village, but we eventually got everyone to agree that Broke-Fordwich was the name, and people say, well, who's going to remember that? And I kept on saying, who remembers Praline Montrachet? Come on. That's having two words is not unusual in the world of appellation. But the difference between here and Colburn is both climatically very similar. We're both about 85 k's from the Pacific Ocean, which is the massive influence on the wine styles of the lower Hunter. Not so much the upper, but certainly the lower. We have a mountain range, a broken back mountain range between here and Colburn. That means we're a little bit dry. We get a little bit less rain coming off the ocean. We still get the humidity. We still get the cool nights, and they're the things that really make that, with the warm days, make Hunter Valley's style of wine for sure. Probably the big thing that is here in Broke-Fordwich is this amazing plug of old volcanic soil. 200 million year old soil that. It's called the Fordwich Fill. That was, discovered by Lindemann and Williams and Saxon Vale back in the late 60s and planted out in the early 70s, and that wonderful area of vineyards is the basis for Margan Wines. This volcanic soil that gives the wines of Broke-Fordwich this very distinctive character. It gives a certain amount of varietal definition that the hard podzolic clays of the hills of Colburn don't give. Necessary things like Cabernet that we get here. So, we can make Cabernet and Barbera and other, Mourvèdre and Graciano and Tempranillo, and on that soil, you get some real varietal definition, which is important. And our wines have just got that little bit more fullness of mid-palate for their whites, and still keep their acidity. We get a little bit more ripeness, and this doesn't make our wines better. that there's no way that Margan's Penions are better than Tyrrell's Semillons. But they are different. They got the softness of palate, and they can be more approachable as younger wines as well. So, I think that's really what is the big thing about Roquefort. And then, you can't separate community and from an area. It's the people in this area. We work together to try and help make Roquefort. It's a place that has a certain amount of integrity and the authenticity in what it does, and that's important.
I think it's interesting because you come across, since I've known you, as someone that thinks on quite a grand scale of the big picture, but can also really micro in and think very detailed about a lot of things. And we talk a little bit, we've talked a bit about kind of your philosophies for what you wanted, the Margan estate to be all about. And sustainability is a huge core philosophy of that. But we hear that word thrown around quite a bit. What does sustainability mean to you in your business?
Yeah, well, first I go back to one winemaker I had who worked here for 8 years, and she's at Bailey's these days. Liz, South African, Liz Augustine, and she was very passionate about the environment. I'd done my environmental degree. Lisa's very passionate about it. We were just looking at we're a farm that's got a winery on it, and most of the things we do on a farm, as most farms do, about recycling, because you don't have town water, you don't have a lot of water necessarily, so you need to use it at least twice or three times if you possibly can. It comes off the roof. You don't necessarily have a garbage run that comes past your front door. Your sewage is recycled. How do we make use of the glass that comes out of the restaurant, the cellar door? How do we make use of all the food items that come out of left over in the restaurant? We've got a garden that feeds the restaurant. How do we feed that back into the garden? How do we feed that back into raising chickens? And was to us a natural journey to get on, to go, okay, well, sustainability is important to this business, so let's be real about it. And Liz in particular put together a environmental management plan, again basing on the four pillars of environmental management, but wider than that. And the interesting thing is that after she'd done all that, Sustainable Wine Australia came along with their program, and like we put our management plan into their program, and it sort of pretty well fitted in directly. And yes, we were one of the first wine businesses that went through the audit, and therefore one of the first to actually get accreditation. We were the first to have it on our wine brand, but we were already doing it before the accreditation process came along. Now there's a lot of people who are now using that accreditation process to introduce an environmental management plan into their businesses, which is great. But we just saw, it just was something that we needed to do. The sustainability we are just caretakers of our land, of course. As you recognise, the Wanneroo were here for 60,000 years before we got here and looked after this land pretty well. And we've come along and originally, put this monoculture into its, fitted it in wherever we could, and we don't see that as a future. Biodiversity is important. Carbon, soil regeneration, carbon sequestration, making your soils healthier rather than having to add things to it, all makes a lot of sense. And as a program, we're very committed to it. Not as an end result. We don't need to have organic, written on our wine label. It's a constant journey, and I think sustainability and regenerative agriculture, which is what we definitely practicing here, is this journey is not about having dogmatic approach. And I really think that things like organic and biodynamic and being accredited through those processes are way too dogmatic, especially in a climate like we work with here in the Hunter Valley. And you require a degree of flexibility in what you're doing. My kids have come along and said, we will not farm this place unless we farm it this way. And I'd say, great, let's do it. It's not going to be easy, but let's find out how we can do it to make it successful. And one thing I keep saying to them is, it's no good being calling yourself an organic grape grower if you end up with no grapes all the time. You're not going to. That's not sustainable. One of the things that sustainability has to be is financially sustainable as well. So, you got to marry these things in. And to me, it's a journey, not a end result.
Yeah, I think time and time again, it is about kind of where you are and what's possible. And yeah, just one blanket rule doesn't apply in this business. But grapes, they're not a native product. They weren't here. They wouldn't be here without us humans. Does sustainability, is that applied throughout your business to people as well?
It's probably not my strong point, people. I got to say that. And it is Lisa's strong point. So I think that's why we've been a good partnership. Working together is not always easy, but she's very good with people, and I'm very good without them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think I recognise that. So I do try to leave all the HR side of what we do to her. But mentoring is something I've been doing now for a number of years, and I believe I've been quite good at my mentoring, and I've been in the mentor program or mentoring other people, but mentoring people in the business, mentoring my kids in what they're doing in their lives. I think I'm quite good at understanding people, that's for sure. Whether they understand me back is probably a point you could argue.
I think because you do have such a wonderful business and you do employ a lot of people, and sustainability, I see from what I've experienced with you guys, does run through a thread of kind of the approach throughout all the levels of business. And what I mean by that is how you handle, staff, talking about the future generations and who we're leaving this for and who the community is and how we better the betterment of the community for the future. And I think that, we, like you said, it also has to be financially sustainable. So there's so many levels to think of, and survival is one of them. And you've seen, like you said, when you came into the business, or not your business, but into Tyrrell's, that it was at a time where it wasn't necessarily flourishing, and you've seen, the wine industry boom in Australia, and then maybe times where it was a bit more challenging. What is your philosophy for kind of maintaining, a business throughout the harder times that we have seen of late?
I think you've got to stay true to your principles, or the integrity of what you're trying to achieve is even more important. I think it's becoming more important in this world that is seeking authenticity, because there is so much bullshit around. There's so much bullshit in our industry, and we're going through a significant downturn in the industry now, and I hope that the best thing that happens for it is it clears out all this crap that's around. There's all this bullshit made up brands and people pretending, these bloody, famous people putting their names on wine bottles saying, "Oh, I'm a winemaker now." I mean, I think it does nothing for the industry. It just, causes confusion about what people should actually be buying, and what they should make sure they're buying is real things, real wine made by real people. But one of the reasons why Australia's lost its way in the world of wine is all this crap, all this stuff that's made up by people just can whack a brand on whatever they like, and put it out in the marketplace and getting it cheap because it's cheap bulk wine. All this stuff that's happening is not good for the industry. And to me, we've had a determination to stay 100% Broke Fortage, to say 100% single vineyard, to say 100% family owned. This is for 15 years now, and that 10 years ago was not necessarily what the industry was rewarding. But by staying true to those values, I think we have got to a point where in an industry that is now really where consumers are really valuing those things, having stayed true to those values has really held us in great stead in a very difficult time. I think we've actually grown a little bit over the last 2 years. I don't think there'd be too many wine companies who could say that they've grown much in the last 2 years the way the industry's been.
Yeah, you make such a good point. And I think that, we have to do our our bit and I mean myself, as I'm counting myself at this moment as a consumer, as to do the research behind what we're buying, but that can't just be all on the person that's paying for it at the end of the day as well. And what some of these made up brands or offshoots that are proposing to be made of authentic stuff and not necessarily are, is they can't be in person. I think that those getting out and sharing your story and all of the love and passion that you put into it, person to person, that's what they can't do, and that's what's going to see you guys through for the long haul. And that authentic story, that real, hardworking part of living, breathing it, all of it, that is what is so just connecting to you guys, that when people have that glass of Margan, when they walk in that cellar door, that's why they're raving when they walk away, because they can see that you live and breathe it through everything you do. And it's so true and so real. Well,
I say to our marketing person, like looking for something to put up on social media, you don't have to make anything up. You could just get out of your chair, grab your phone or your camera and just walk around the place and take photos of what everyone's doing. I mean, there's a story. Like every day there's stuff going on, in the winery, in the vineyard, in our gardens, in our kitchen, which tell the story of what we're about. We're farmers making wine and growing our vegetables and serving the people on plates in our restaurant, and a glass of wine that came off the vineyard, and right next to it is it's all about that. And there's nothing made up. It's all happening, and that's what people are wanting. That I mean, we have it here in spades. So let's just focus on that, and let's not. We don't need to make anything up.
I remember reading some words from John Lethlean that said, if you're only ever to stop, make one meal and make one stop, go to Margan. But I agree, because I think that you walk in the door there and it's tangible what you guys have created. And I think you see it from the smallest little things like the fresh flowers in the bathroom to all the detail in the wines on the table and in the people that you encounter in that cellar door. And I think it is a real magical place. I certainly always look forward to being there. And I think what you've created, and your family and now your very talented children, is a powerhouse and will be, a tier that we are all so proud of in Australia.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I got to say, particularly Ollie coming into the business, I went through a bit of a journey myself where Lisa studied a WESIT diploma and had her books all over the dining room table all the time. And, I said, look, and asking me 1,000 questions, it's like, okay, I don't think this is the best way to do it. I think the best way we do this is hop on a plane and let's go visit all these places. So we did, and I said, I'm happy. I'll be your driver and your translator, and you'll learn about these places so much easier if we go and spend time there. So we did a couple of years of doing that. I walked away from that, coming home and looking at what we have here, and I thought, you know what, this place is bloody special, and I probably don't give it enough understanding around how special it is, and it's coincided with Ollie, the kids coming home who also have recognized, been around the world and have come back into the fold and gone, man, this is such a special place, and you guys have done such a amazing job in this special place. And it's like, yeah, actually, you're right. We've just been here every day, and it's sort of grown organically, and we haven't probably given it enough thought. Anyway, all of that came together with the understanding that, we do have some amazing blocks here that we could do a lot more with. And so viticulture had been working very hard on getting that right. And then that's flowed through the winery, and in particular with Ollie here going, every single block is special and we need to treat it like properly and specially and individually. And I've always done that in some ways, but probably not as, like looked at enhancing stylistically or whatever it is about that particular block. What can I do with it in a winemaking sense? I was probably a little bit more logistical than artisanal, and he certainly brought the artisanal in, and we got some new equipment in, and so we can do a whole bunch of pressing and, new better oak selection and smaller open fermenters for reds and using much more natural yeast and natural malos and less sulfur and all these bits and pieces have culminated, I think, in us definitely making the best wines that this winery's ever made. And the last 3 or 4 vintages, we are making some incredible wines, and that journey I don't think will ever end. Especially with Ollie is so determined that is the future of Margan Wine. And if a block isn't capable of making either our new single block range, which is just coming out now, we need to either pull it out or graft it over or change it into something that is, because if it's not aspirational, it's not worth having.
Well, I think that you guys are in a very exciting place. Ollie's passion is palpable, and I love listening to him speak because, he is just so determined and just passionate about what he is, and it really comes across. But don't forget that also came from a very good upbringing, so you can claim a bit of that.
Look, I know. I guess I've always been passionate about what I do. I can articulate it. He articulates it so much better than I love listening to him tell his story of what Margan Wine is and what it represents, because it actually has been very helpful in informing me of what it is. And I mean, your introduction to me, like, it genuinely surprises me. I guess, again, we've just been working away day by day, and this place is 30 years down the track, and what you say, if that's true, then that makes me very proud. It's not how I look at the place. I look at the place with a great deal of pride, but I still see so much in front of us and so much work to be done to get to where we need to be. Because I know where Ollie wants to be. He wants to be Mount Mary or Wendouree, and that's not an easy place to get to in this world. But he's determined to be a brand like that, and man, wouldn't you love to be like a brand like that?
Uniquely so, the Margan way, absolutely. And I just think, I'm just going to get out of Ollie's way and watch and taste and be along for the ride, which is very exciting. But together, what you are creating together is truly remarkable. And like I said, it has been a brand that's been along my whole journey, and I've grown with watching and drinking your wines. Andrew, I'd love to know a little bit about your palate, and if you can do 3 drinks today, what would they be and why?
What I couldn't do without, well, one would be beer for sure. I can't imagine doing that beer. 2 would have to be champagne. I got to say, it is a very special drink, champagne. And 3 would be, I reckon, if I had to narrow it down to one grape variety that if that's what it boiled down to, it'd be Riesling. I think what I'm seeing in Germany with the change of climate and the warming there and the grapes getting ripe is that Riesling as a variety is just so fascinating. It will be the number 1 grape variety in the world, I believe. It can do so many things, and the way it ripens and the style of wine. I have seen a couple of wines out of Germany the last couple of years that have just blown my mind. And, I've been around for a while. I didn't think I'd ever see another wine that blew my mind. But, man, I've seen a couple of German Rieslings that just, wow, I can't believe you can get such texture into a wine like that.
Well, we certainly see that it is a translator of place, Riesling, and it is just breakfast juice too. So, I mean, 2 things that I can get on board with. Andrew, it's always a pleasure to hear from you, to hear about what's going on in your world, in your mind. I'm a huge fan, and I'm really grateful that you've spent some time with me today. So thank you.
No, thank you. It was great. Appreciate it.
Cheers to you.
Thank you.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.